May 26, 2026. How about that? Memorial Day, it was yesterday, and I hope everybody had either appropriate observance or just had fun, whichever your preference was. Well, again, there's something today, and that is looking back to the Ukraine war with Russia-Ukraine war. We haven't been talking about that a lot lately because we've been focused so much on what's going on with Iran and all that. Um, But again, if you recall, the last time we had high fuel prices, it was due to that one. Now this is due to the other one, to some degree. And I think so what have we been noticing lately is there's been apparently a lot of evidence that there's been some kind of increasing pressure on Putin, and it looks then the kind of the tripwire was the Ukrainians launched a missile attack on a college in the in Luhansk area, which Russia has annexed, occupied, whatever you want to call it. And so, and like something like 21 people were killed. It's almost all civilians and students. Ukraine was trying to make a claim initially that this was a headquarters of some special unit of the Russian military, and but apparently it wasn't, or else it was a lot of civilians there at that headquarters. At any rate, apparently this hit a college, and apparently this has completely incensed the Russians, and it was a pretty deliberate attack. 16 drones targeted it in succession, so this wasn't just like one drone went wild and hit something. Um, and so, at any rate, that's led to now a reprisal, and the Russians launched a pretty massive set of strikes using their Oreshnik missile and a lot of other missiles and drones. And of course, allegedly two Oreshniks were used in this thing. One was launching it at a facility somewhere near Kyiv, to the I guess it was the southwest of it, and the other one apparently was actually in areas maybe near south of Kherson, not Kherson, excuse me, Kharkiv. And although early on there was some thought that maybe it was a misfire, but apparently it wasn't. And so, and now the Russians are telling everybody to get out of Kyiv if you're a foreigner, and stay away from Ukrainian military facilities in that area because they're going to continue the attacks on them. And I think what is going on here is that there was kind of a sanctuary in Kyiv, which allowed the NATO forces, intelligence officers, to work with the Ukrainian intelligence efforts, the SBU and whatever, to organize a variety of drone and strikes inside of Russia and so forth, and probably even tactical battle strikes inside the war itself. And that has led to a lot of losses on the Russian side, and I guess, as I understand, also a lot of the drone factories are actually in that area, since it's sort of a capital, and it was a bit of a sanctuary. At least, apparently, some targets were off limits, probably because the Russians didn't, among other things, don't want the counterattack. Maybe they think they're in a good enough position now. I don't know, or maybe they figure they're going to go ahead and attack Moscow anyhow. They've attacked all the oil refineries, so at any rate, suppose this thing is escalating in that direction. And so we can expect, I presume, more attacks using various weapons against these drone factories and decision centers. And if in fact we don't pull our personnel out, they will probably be casualties among NATO and even U.S. personnel due to this. I mean, if they're in the same facility coordinating, and we don't know how many Americans, for instance, have died in the Ukraine war. Two types. One, just people that volunteered to fight in the Ukrainian military, but also there are also other people who are actually officers, CIA, and other people that are at various headquarters have probably been struck throughout the last 4 years. So at any rate, that is escalating, and that's something to look at is with some caution. There's also the Russians have passed some law which allows them to use the military to protect Russians that are outside of their territory, which the reference is apparently there's a lot of Russian ethnics that are still in places like Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia. And so, and of course, those are NATO countries, so you could get into an Article 5 situation. We also have the situation where those countries have been used as a conduit for Ukrainian drones to attack areas near St. Petersburg and some of the oil facilities there. And we don't know whether that was done with, quote, permission, or they just did it. I mean, what are they going to do about it if Ukraine decides to do it, since Ukraine's that much stronger? Although they may have had permission. That is up in the air, do they have permission to do that? They did it. And there was another incident in which there were a drone actually hit some facilities in, I think it was Latvia, and led to the defense of the resignation of their defense minister. So there you're looking at a situation where, and some suspicion was that this wasn't a Ukrainian drone deliberately, that the Russians had somehow repurposed a captured Ukrainian drone, perhaps one that had fell to the ground and the warhead not detonated, and used opponents or whatever, and sent it in to attack a target to make it look like the Ukraine had attacked them. Or we don't know, or whether, there's no reason Ukraine would attack that facility. So in that case, it's just a mistake. But at any rate, that caused some disturbance already. Tensions are rising. There's some discussion, should they just go ahead and take the, that little sliver of land there that's between Poland and the Baltics. So at any rate, however, the thing is that is kind of a missile base and might lead to a dramatic escalation if it was attempted. I don't think there's any doubt we could take it, but then that might lead to a situation where, for instance, that would be where that law could then come into place. They would fight through the Baltic states to get to it, and then, of course, then you're in some kind of a NATO-Russia war if that were to occur. And hopefully it won't, but and this thing could get really nasty in many ways. I mean, for instance, what if Finland attacks St. Petersburg? And then what if Russia has to escalate to deal with the situation? I still think that there's a real risk that if there were a NATO-Russia war, that it would go at least tactical nuclear, because I don't think that, given the superiority of NATO's air power, I think the only way that Russia could effectively counter it would be, at this stage, would be with nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons are very effective against conventional air power, because an air base is a pretty soft target, really, and one medium-sized warhead pretty much can just, wipe out the base, and then the question is, what do we do then? I mean, if Russia's going to lose the air war anyhow, you can retaliate on a symmetrical basis. Might not really be that effective, since they potentially lose it anyhow in conventional combat, and they do a lot more damage, as you can see what's going on in Iran, the power that these tactical conventional weapons have. And a very limited number of bombs would pretty much neutralize these air bases. That's the fear I have, that it escalate. And then how do we retaliate? And if we do strike at Russia with nuclear weapons, of course, then they'd probably strike back at the continental U.S. with nuclear weapons, and that could go unlimited exchange very quickly. And even if we, quote, win the war, in which each side loses 100 million people, that pretty much wipes Russia out, and we're pretty well devastated. Probably no major city in the country would be spared a nuclear attack. I mean, imagine a major metropolitan area. Even if a few of the warheads get in, just the fact that a warhead goes down in your metropolitan area, Los Angeles, Dallas, Fort Worth, the Atlanta metro, and so forth, New York, even if the whole thing isn't leveled, you still have a contamination issue, just the shock effect. So anyway, let's hope it doesn't happen. But I'm just saying that I think this thing could shift in a bad direction unintentionally if people keep making really bad decisions. And another thing that has an escalatory potential to it is that Russia has been using, since they lost their Starlink, they're using bases inside of Belarus in order to basically guide drones going on the northern perimeter of Ukraine, near Kyiv, for instance, and further west. And so that gets a situation where the Ukrainians could think of attacking Belarus. And then, of course, that leads to an expanded war with two countries involved. Anyway, I just kind of run down the situation. Um, in terms of the actual ground battles, Ukraine's had a few successes in counterattacks, and Russia's having some successes in their offensive. So it's an ongoing thing, and there is growing capabilities of various drones that the Ukrainians have put into play, which may have led to this latest set of attacks on these industrial sites. If you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, or you can follow me on Rumble as I post there as well. On the domestic front, Trump is still involved in the negotiations with Iran through third parties. And, of course, some of the more militant members on the right wing are criticizing this. And they want some sort of a victory. I mean, Ted Cruz and Pompeo, people like that, Lindsey Graham. But the problem is, I don't know there's any clear route to a victory that would be, the problem we have is we need to get the Straits of Hormuz open to international traffic in order to get the price of the fuel down and to prevent the impact on the whole world economy, including food for the third world, everything. So, and currently that's being held hostage. On the other hand, I think there have been some progress, maybe due in part to Trump's negotiation with President Xi, because I think that the Chinese need it open more than we do in an extreme case, of course. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that there may be some pressure on the Iranians to make some kind of a deal, but they're holding firm for the moment on the whole issue of the uranium hexafluoride, which we want out. But now I hear we're moderating a little bit, that maybe it will be not handed over, but maybe diluted under some kind of international agreement. The problem is, if we make an agreement of that sort and get a ceasefire and get the Strait of Hormuz open to traffic without a toll, if we can get that, then if the nuclear thing is put off to a later date, you could imagine that what would happen then is that the Iranians would not agree to the nuclear deal, and then they would we'd be set with a situation where that what do we do? Restart the war again right before the election, or what? You can see and after the election, if the Democrats get control of the one branch of the House, one House, or hopefully don't get the Senate. I mean, but we could have real problems in doing things, and there's other things I foresee already happening. There is growing, as I mentioned in the last video, there's pushback or growing tension between members of the Republican caucus and the Congress and Trump. And part of it's due to the fact that Trump, for instance, endorsed Paxton over Cornyn in the Texas race, which is, in fact, we'll be seeing in the evening the outcome of how that goes. I look at the polling, I kind of think I know how it's going to go, but and of course that gives the Republicans a bit more of a challenge, because the Republican establishment has gone all out to trash Paxton in the primary, and everything that's in those Republican ads will now be utilized by the Democrats in the fall campaign. Whereas there really isn't the only negative thing I can see really about Cornyn is, well, maybe he's old and been around a while. And the second thing about him is, of course, that gun law, which I don't think did much of anything really. But, as gun laws go, that one is pretty mild. It's not like a magazine ban or weapon ban or anything of that sort, ammunition. It was just basically about getting people who actually were prohibited from owning guns under the current laws actually in the FBI system, because apparently people hadn't been reporting them, and they were trying to fund them, people actually turning in the data, which is not all bad, because if the person passed a background check, to buy a weapon, and then later on is found with it that they're a prohibited person, the fact they passed the check, I don't think gives them any real protection. And some of the prohibitions are kind of ridiculous, actually. But let's don't get into that. That's a more complex subject. But at any rate, so I think that kind of goes. That's the only thing I see against Cornyn, but I think that we'll see how that plays out. The Democrat that's running is a real flake, and so maybe we can still win. After all, Paxton beat Bush, you know, the candidate for the Attorney General thing, and actually won the election 2 years ago. So, anyway, so that's kind of the way things are going. Kind of wrap it up for now, and as always, I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble, and the rest of my social media accounts are in the description below.